In this Getting Started with JavaScript series, we're going to take a look at three important parts of front-end JavaScript. The first is we will be talking about classes and working with classes and JavaScript, how we can add classes, remove classes, change classes, etc. Then we'll be in the next part talking about events and event listeners, and finally wrapping it up with input fields, and that will combine our knowledge of the previous two sections. So to begin, we're going to go into some things related to classes and CSS. So as always, my document has been saved as a .html file that now allows me to use the default document template. So I'm working with the HTML5 one. And I'm just going to put a title here. Now I have set up the live server inside of my Visual Studio Code. It's already running on the page over here. So now I have my page ready for me to work with it. And we don't have any content on the page, so not a whole lot of content is going to show up yet. But I could simply add an H1 here. I'll save that. Let's look over here and make sure things are running. So we can see that our page is updating. And once again, if I just save that, go back to my page, we can see we have updates occurring. So now we know that our page is indeed working. Now I'm going to add in a paragraph. This is my first paragraph, and then we will add a second. This is the second paragraph. So now if we save that, look over here, we can see that we have some things working. Now what I'm going to do is add in some CSS information, some styles, because once I do that, I can then start working with the JavaScript to modify this information. So a couple things that I could play with here is I could, on the main body itself, sorry, my bad. First, I need to go style. Now in my style body, and what I want to do is just do a font family. And with this family, I just want to go sans serif. So I'm letting the code completion help me here so I don't have to type it all in, so it goes pretty quick. So I type the first letter of what I'm looking for. I can use arrows to move up and down, or I can just start typing more of it out till it narrows it down to the exact one I want. Now I can see I changed I just like the sans serif better while I am working on this. Next, I'm going to add in a few classes here. Let's just add a red class, and we'll just say color red. Whoop. And now we can add in blue. And as I just start typing, it's auto-completing for me. And there it is. Now I am using the color picker extension, which is why I get my little color swatch appearing next to it. It also gives me an option if I hover over a color, I could even choose a new color off the list. So it's an extension that I have installed along with my other extensions. So if you're looking for it, go into extensions, type in color picker, and you can enable it on your project. And I find that to be a handy one while I am working. Now what I can do is I'm going to just add in even though I changed it to sans serif, now I'm going to add in a class that will be serif, and then font sans serif. And once again, I can just type SA, comes up, hit return on the keyboard, it chooses that off the list. Now, two that I will be playing with here, I'm just going to put a return here so we can have extra returns to space things out a little bit. We'll have display block so we can set the display property of our element. To block, we're also going to have display none. And when we do that, so I can just down arrow, click, and now we see it off the list. If I type N, hey look, there's none, done. So we can now control whether things show or don't show. So currently I have two paragraphs here. And there's a couple of different ways I could access those. I could do it by going through the different tags that I have on my page. I can also put more specific identifiers on these, so I could attach an ID onto it. So I could do something like ID equals quotes P1, and on the next one ID equals P2. So we have some markup, we have some style information. What is missing from this project now is our script. So I'll just type in SC, get script, get myself some space in which I can write it, and now as I want to go write this script and work with it, this is where the fun happens. This is where we can now start accessing things. So I could even go let h1 equal document dot query selector. So QUS comes up with query selector method. I like query selector because then it can select a class, it can select a tag, it can select an ID. So it's a very versatile way instead of having three separate methods. Now we put in quotes what we're trying to select. In this case, I want to select my H1. And now you will notice that I set my variable name equal to my item that I'm trying to select. And the reason for that is then I don't have to think as hard about what I'm trying to do. It makes it easier. Now I could just as easily, this could be something like, I could say let Scooby equals document query selector H1. It would work and my variable name is now Scooby. So there's nothing magic about this. It's just later on in my code, if I had a large program, I'd look through and go, Scooby, what is that? I don't know. But if I say H1, I know that I'm talking about the H1 on the page. So this is why having our variable name related to the element we're trying to select can make our life a lot easier when you go and try and read your code later. Because now I can simply say h1.className, className, there we go. And we're going to assign it a class name. When we do this, if there was a class on it, it goes away and it now replaces it with what we are putting here. So keep in mind when we have elements, elements can have any number of classes assigned to them, multiple classes. So I could have paragraph and then I could go class equals and I could say red, blue, font serif, display none, and suddenly it might be red and serif, but we don't get to see it because we told it display none. But we could have multiple classes assigned to something. That's pretty common when we use frameworks like, say, Bootstrap, because then it uses multiple classes for layout purposes on how to position something on our page. So now it's waiting for me to declare the class name that I want to put here. And we can use single quotes or double quotes, both are fine. We can put semicolons at the end of statements or not. And now my class name here, I am going to go with font serif. And now when I do that, let's save the page here and look. What we should always do is predict what we're going to see. And then when we go to the page, do we see it? And we can now see that my H1 is serifed where my other paragraphs are not. It's also useful to pull up our developer tools. So under View Developer, and I always just start out, the key command I remember is the JavaScript console because we're writing JavaScript. So I always just start with that. And so on my Mac Chrome, it's Command Option J. Your web browser, it may vary and be something else. You may have a developer pull-down menu if you're using something like Apple Safari. So you have to figure out where it is for you to get to developer to see your different tools. So for me, Command Option J pulls up this window here, and now I can see console. So if I log messages here, have errors, and now I can go to my elements, and I can see, hey, look, here's my page. Look, there's the H1, classes, font, serif. But if I look here, that's not actually in the code. We put that in with JavaScript. So this is where we now realize we are able to modify what is there. So to show how this changes it, if I go class equals blue, save this, think about what's going to happen, then we look, we can see it changed the text to blue. We look here, there is a class of blue. But if I were to say let p1 equal document.query selector, and then we want to grab it by its ID, so we use hashtag p1. So it's the same designation we use when we're referencing. If we have an ID in our style sheet, then we would do it here. So if we were to do something like hashtag p2 color tomato, just because it's fun. All right. So now if we go here, we can look, we can see it as tomato. That's too close to red. Maybe let's go find something else. Can go grab this. Actually, yeah, I want to grab that color. And now we can see it grab this RGB color of those values. Let's save that, and we can see, yep, there it is. Okay, so we know that that's working, so that's good. And P1 has a class of blue, but now if we were to go P1 dot class name equals red here, let's save that and take a look, and we can see that it's red. We can see in the markup it now shows it as red. So we're using JavaScript to override the assignments of style information inside my markup. So JavaScript's really powerful in its capacity to do this, that we can now change things that are on screen. But in addition to doing that, not only can we change a class name, we can modify a class list. So currently P1 has a class list of red, P1 dot class list dot add. Now when we add it, we don't use equals, we're just adding to it. In this case, let's put in blue. So now if I look here, I'll say the class list on P1 is red followed by blue. Well, we don't get to see the red because the blue is now overriding it. But that's kind of silly to have two colors in, or assigning it that way, so that doesn't really make sense. But if I were to do something like font serif, save that, now we'll see that it is red and serifed. So it's now overriding the body style information, which said this document should be sans serif. So it's not a bad idea to set a base size, color, and font family for your whole document so you don't have to specify it again. And then on individual things you want to change, then you assign classes to them. It's generally considered a better practice to assign IDs and classes to your elements and then change their display or their visual properties using CSS in your style section or in a separate style sheet, not to do it directly in the main document. We can also make statements, so we could say we want all items, we want to affect something with a class, so document dot query selector, and right now paragraph 1 has a class on it, so we would do quote dot blue, so something with the class of blue. And now we could change its class name and say we'll set that equal to class name, not adding or remove. Class name is now going to be equal to display none. Now when I do that, let's see what happens. Nothing. And it didn't work, and if I go into the console, I'm getting an error message. I cannot set the properties of null. So I tried to grab blue, but I made an error. And the error is that right here, I changed the class name to red, so there was no blue on that. So let me just comment these out. Save this. Now the error message goes away, and we can see that paragraph goes away as well. But if I look under my elements, I will see that it's there. It's just not displaying, because P1 has a class now of display none. So sometimes we do things, we're like, hey, I'm trying to be real clever here, and I put this in, forgetting that I removed blue from it, and now it only has red. So save this, now let's see, and now we can see then it works because it's able to find that class of red assigned to it. The same way that, so we don't really need this line anymore here, but the same way that I've added this in, let's save it, see what our page looks like. So it's red font serif for my classes. Now, if I were to go p1 dot remove or class list dot remove and then specify the one I'm trying to remove, then it will remove red. Let's see what it looks like now. When I go here, we can see which, let's see, do I have an error message? Yes, I have an error message. It didn't work, so let's pop into the console, and it's like, cannot read of undefined, reading remove, at line 32. Line 32, let's go find that. I forgot the S in class. There's 2 and I only typed 1. Save that, the error message went away. I look here, it's no longer red. Oh, well, we should look at the elements, and we can see that, yeah, that's working. It's just now serifed, but there's no red attached to it anymore. So working with our classes, we can set class name, and that assigns that class to it. We can use classList to add or remove specific classes from an element. So we have 2 methods at our disposal depending on what we're trying to do. If our element just needs one class attached to it, class name is a great way to work. We know it just works. ClassList is good if you know that there's going to be multiple classes on an element and you want to add or subtract a particular item from it. Now, something else to keep in mind. So I've added font serif here. We removed red. If I were to do something like classList dot add blue. We don't need the dot here because we already know we're dealing with a class. That's why we don't have to put query selector. We have to put the dot in front of it because it doesn't know are we looking for a class, an ID, or a tag. Okay, so now we can see the first, it now says font serif blue. Okay, added font serif, removed red, added blue. Notice it's doing it in the order that's there. Now let's say I add blue 3 times. What does it look like when we do it? It only added it once. So what it's doing is once it's added there, if we say add again, it doesn't add a second. There's no reason to say blue blue for our classes. It just goes, hey, if it's not there, we add it. That's it. And if we say remove and it's not there, it doesn't make an error. It just, if it's not there, it doesn't remove anymore because you can't remove something that's twice. Because if it's not there, it's not there. The same way, once it's added, you don't add multiple copies of it. That would just be silly. So there you go. Add, remove under classList, className. So these are the methods that we're going to be using for adding and subtracting specific CSS classes from our HTML elements through the magic of JavaScript.